Do you hear me? Mic check. Yeah,
Yes,
we
I
got
sure
you.
do.
So I got noon here in California. So let's go ahead and kick this off for the monthly SSHO training. Everybody's pretty excited, just like I am. So let's do
Oh
it.
yeah.
All right, so this is underground, above ground utility avoidance. You guys all know me. I'm Nick. I got Jeff in the room with me. So if you hear anything weird, that's Jeff. So let's talk about. So one of the things we always need to talk about when we do a safety training is the core values of our safety group, right? So we value the safety, security, and wellness of our people and their families. All right. We always want to embrace healthy habits and behaviors. We plan and conduct our work in a manner that protects people as well as their property and the environment, right? So you always want to make sure you start off your jobs or anything you're doing with that in mind to get the ball rolling correctly. All right. Be a safety leader. This one's really big for me. Safeties are always in the field. We're a lot of the front lines a lot of the time because work can't happen without a safety out there. So we're usually always in the field, so we always need to be a safety leader, right? So the first thing we need to do is lead by example, like make safety a core value by walking the talk and reinforcing the idea that everyone owns safety, right? So that's a big thing that we always talk about. That everybody always owns safety in the field. Like here in California, we're on the fires right now, and it's like if you see a hazard, now you own that hazard. You don't leave it until somebody comes out and corrects it, right? Because you don't want anybody else to get hurt. So, be that leader that's willing to take charge in the field and identify the hazards. Engage team members, right? Engage, encourage, and empower team members to identify and act on unsafe situations. So, same thing, right? See something, say something. You see something in the field, let it be known that it's okay to say something, right? Everybody has stop work authority. There is no punitive pushback or anything for reporting hazards or unsafe situations or stopping work. So always make sure you practice that out there. Actively listen and practice three-way communication. So have people repeat what you say. So if you're telling them something, that's unsafe or you're telling them a way to correct an unsafe behavior, ask them, hey, can you tell me that back? That way that you are making sure that they understand, right? So we work with a lot of different people and sometimes a lot of different countries and cultures, right? So things might mean different things other places, right? But words still have meaning. So make sure they understand by saying, can you repeat it back to me? Right? You're not disrespecting them, you're just saying, hey, yeah, you got it. You're good. Develop team members through teaching, coaching, and feedback, right? So give them facts, impact, suggestions in a timely manner. It's called FIST. And recognize team members for a job well done. So publicly and privately acknowledge team members when they consistently work safe and contribute to a positive safety climate. So if you were on the project update, safety project update the other day, you heard Kim talk about this where, we really want to start emphasizing uh, incentive programs, right? So publicly acknowledging people when they do something really well, right? So plaques or, you know, whatever you want to do out there, but publicly recognize people for doing what they do safely, right? It's a big deal. Helps out with VPP and all those other programs that we're involved in, right? But also when you're publicly, praising somebody, I always say praise in public, punish in private, right? So if you need to make a correction in the field, make sure that you're not embarrassing anybody. So make sure you're doing it in a professional manner. Pull them to the side and say, hey, let me talk to you for a second. Unless it's an imminent danger to life or health, and then just go ahead and correct it however you need to correct it. All right, so let's talk about underground utility avoidance, right? So one of the big things when it comes to underground utility avoidance is going to be 811, right? So it's all over the nation, right? It might be called different things. It might be called dig safe, like it is here in California. I know when we were working in North Carolina and Florida, it's 811 straight up. But you still need to call before you dig, right? That's their big saying is call before you dig. And if you've ever seen the commercials for 811, they got old boy from Cheers out there. He's digging in his front yard, putting in a mailbox in, strikes oil, right? And then he didn't call 811. So what is 811? It's the national call before you dig phone number. Anyone who plans to dig should call 811 or enter the 811 website and see what you can get, right? So on all our projects, if we're going to do underground utility work, especially in the States, you need to call 811. If you're on a base, more than likely it's going to be a private locator, but you still need to put an 811 ticket in more often than not just to make sure that there is no major utilities that run through there, like gas pipelines and things like that, that the base isn't responsible for, or because they're not the actual owner of the utility. So what info do you need before calling 811? You need to know the address where you plan to dig, including the county and nearest cross street, as well as the type of project you're completing and the exact area of the property where you plan on digging. Whether you call 811 or make a request online, you still need all the same info. So we'll talk about the online portion here in a minute. So after I call 811, what do? You need to wait a few days to allow utilities to respond to your request and ensure that all utilities have indeed responded to your request before breaking ground. Once all utilities have been marked, their buried lines, you should dig carefully around any utility marks, and consider relocating projects that are close to buried utilities, right? So 9 times out of 10, we don't get that option. We got to build where we got to build, or we got to do what we got to do. So we're going to have to work around those utilities, and we'll talk about ways how to do that. So 811 in your state, this is straight off the 811 website. So if you go to 811, you can just click on your state, and it'll tell you exactly what you need to do, who you need to call, what numbers, if there's a separate number that you need to call, or who you need to call if your ticket didn't go through, right? So you can just hit Florida, California, Georgia, and it'll pop up, right? Canada, you can see there it says live in Canada, learn more here, right? So if you're in Canada and you need to dig, click there to learn more. So positive response, this is a big one. So once your tickets go in, it's really important that you wait the 48 to 72 hours for the utility companies to come out and locate them. But what if they don't? So what if you're ready to dig and you're like, they haven't come out yet? Why haven't they? So there's an app that you can download on your phone, or you can go through the website to do it as well. It's called Positive Response. So if you go into the App Store or whatever and type in North Carolina 811 positive response, or California 811 positive response, whatever state you're in, or if it's DigSafe, you can go in there and check positive response, and it's literally just that. It's to see if they've positively responded to your request to have utilities located. So you go in there, you get your ticket number that you've been assigned for your request to 811, you type your ticket number in, hit submit, and it'll pop up the screen something like this. It might have changed by now, but it's going to say, hey, we located the gas line on like Duke, located on 22525. Then it's going to say AT&T, no conflict. That means they looked up on their GIS or their maps, and they don't have any utilities in the way of where you're going to build, which is why it's so important that you give them the address and cross streets and all those other good details. That way they can look up on their systems to see if they even need to send anybody out there, right? So if it says no conflict, that means they don't have any utilities within the area that you're working, and they're not going to send anybody out there, so you're not going to ever see any paint on the ground. But it's a really good tool to have, especially if you're in the field and you need to check a utility locate ticket quickly. You can just pull that up on your phone, type in your numbers, and see where you're at. That way, if you need to start building and then everybody else has responded and you're a day ahead of schedule on your ticket, if there's no conflict, go ahead and dig. So markings, obviously that picture to the right, I wouldn't want to build there because that would be a nightmare for hand digging and whatnot. But all pretty universal for utility marking colors, right? So red, that's electric. Yellow, gas, oil, or steam. Orange, comm, telephone, cable TV. Bluish color, water, obviously. Green, sewer. Purple, reclaimed water. I'm sure you've seen lots of this out there. Temporary survey markings in the pink. And white is going to be proposed construction. So that, like it says, locate 25-foot radius right there. That's where they're proposing to dig, right? So that's where you're going to see the markings out there. So for an example, this one came from Indiana 811. So it's everywhere. All right, so digging near buried utilities, right? So there's a tolerance zone. So if you can do fast math, you can see that picture to the right, that if you have a 10-inch pipe and then you add 24 inches, right, that's where you need to be, your total tolerance zone is going to be. So the flags and paint used to mark buried facilities show the approximate location of the physical facility. They have a tolerance zone that runs 24 inches from the facility's outside edge. Right, so when digging in the tolerance zone, excavators are required to use increased caution to protect and identify underground facilities. Right, potholing, soft digging, vacuum excavation methods, or other similar procedures. Right, so they can come out there and mark your utility, and it's not an exact science by any means. If you've ever been on a construction site and watched them mark utilities or had to dig for them, you know it's not an exact science. They're going to mark it in a straight line and swear that it's right there, and it's a foot and a half to the left of where the paint's at, right? So that's why you want to give it that tolerance zone of, hey, we got to start out here at least 24 inches away from the outside diameter of the pipe and work our way in to make sure we know exactly where the pipe is at. When exposing a facility while digging, provide adequate support and protection for it, right? So if you're going to completely expose, a comm wire or something like that, say you're going across a creek or anything like that, make sure it's properly supported. That way you don't break the utility when you uncover it from the earth. That happens a lot. So safe digging methods, right? So it's really important. So soil pick, if you've ever used a soil pick, they're pretty clutch for uh, cutting down on the manual labor when it comes to exposing utilities and marking them out in the field. So pros, safest method used to spot utilities. You can use the soil from the excavation to backfill with, which is a big deal because if you don't have to truck in new dirt, if you're going to make a big hole, right? Cons does not work in all types of soil. If you get into rock and stuff like that, it might not work very well. Hydrovac, we use these a lot, uh, especially in civil work. If you're going to be spotting utilities, gas lines, things of that nature that are fragile and you don't want to hit. Uh, Works better in all types of soils, right? The only bad thing about it is the soil can't be used to backfill. New soil must be brought in. So when we were working at McDill, replacing the bridge out there, we used a hydrovac every day, and then we had to find dirt to put back into the holes once we found the utilities. So it's very good method to use, but one of the things you need to watch out when you're hydro excavating is 9 times out of 10 we're going to use a sub to do that. And once you get a pretty good sized pit open with the hydrovac, right, that soil starts to undermine itself, and those hydrovac operators always want to be right on the edge so they can see where the tip of their vacuum's going. So make sure you're keeping them back. You don't want to have to fish one of them out of there. So that would be really bad. So make sure you're utilizing the proper, distance from the edge of the hole. So safe digging hand methods, right? Don't put your full weight on the shovel or spade when locating or exposing a facility. I mean, we've all done it. You're out there and you just jump up on the shovel and put all your full body weight on it so you can get a deep cut in there. It's not good because you could hit a utility, but could also cause damage to the employee's lower extremities, including the back. So if you slip off there, you run your foot down the side of the shovel. Those shovels are pretty sharp sometimes. It could cut your foot. It could cut the bottom of your foot if you slip off, or you could hit a utility underground. Some of those, especially in older bases and things like that, there's just wires everywhere. So, and they just abandon them in place. So you don't know if it's going to be live or not. So make sure you don't do that. Inspect all shovels before you use them. So that should be self-explanatory because most shovels have wooden handles. So if you go out there and you've been using a shovel all day long, or obviously we're not going to be doing this work, others are, but this is what we need to watch out for. If it's splintered and they're shoveling all day and just shoveling and shoveling, you need to make sure that there's no cracks in the shovel, because if they're putting their body weight on it, which they shouldn't do, and it snaps, it could be an impalement hazard, or they could trip and fall on it and it would be a bad day, or have a hand injury. So report all damaged shovels or spades to the foreman immediately. That way they can get them replaced and get them out of service and get the right tools in there. Uh, a lot in the gas field and areas like this, water, sewer, they use a pro rod to spot larger facilities. So pro rod is essentially just that. It's just a metal rod that they stick in the ground with a T handle on top of it so they can just feel the utility of where it's at, right? So you want to make sure if you're going to do that, which I don't recommend at all, because people tend to get very excited when they start jamming probe rods into the ground, and you can easily puncture even MDPE pipe with a probe rod fairly easily if you've got a larger individual ramming it into the ground, right? So, but if you're going to use a probe rod, make sure it's a blunt probe rod, not a one that has a spear tip on it, because obviously a spear tip will go directly through a pipe like a hot knife through butter. Use extreme care when removing pavement with excavating equipment. Often facilities are installed very shallow, so every place frost line is probably going to be different. So I think the frost line in North Carolina is 36 inches. It's probably different in Florida because of the weather and the climate. So some things can be buried shallow and they can become attached or grow onto concrete and things like that. So make sure you're using caution when you're moving them. So steps for exposing facilities by hand. So carefully using a towel, spade, or shovel to expose the facility, right? We already talked about. Start spotting 2 feet away from the marked utility and then start tunneling towards the utility. This gives the soil an area to move to and you'll be able to see the utility before you get there. So you see the yellow paint there? That's probably going to be a gas line. So start 2 feet away and start working your way towards it because you might encounter it before you actually get to the paint. Some do's and don'ts. Work with the back rounded part of the shovel next to or in the direction of the utility. This can minimize any possibility of a damage. If you look at the picture there. So that's the back part of the shovel. It's kind of rounded. So if you hit the utility, it's just going to roll off of it because most utilities are pipes or tubes or so they're also going to be rounded. So it'll just roll over it, hopefully, unless you get it with the very tip. And then don't work with the edge of the shovel next to the utility. Any side movement can cause damage. So you see there in the picture, the lower right-hand corner, shovels get sharp going through rocks all day long. So it's basically just like sharpening a knife. If you're going in rock constantly all day long, ABC, whatever you're working in. And so those things are going to get sharp. And if you jam it down into the ground with your foot on it, just like he is, it could possibly puncture the outside of that utility that you're working on. Oh, again, go the wrong direction. There you go. So do's and don'ts of hand digging continued. Never spear the ground. You have no control over the contact point. Considered aggressive digging. So we don't want to be aggro when we're digging. So make sure you're utilizing proper calm hand digging techniques. If you get all upset, don't grab a probe rod and just throw it in the ground. I've literally seen people do it and hit water lines, and it's just not good, right? So never take the shortcut and use an excavator to break the surface of the ground. All spotting procedures are required prior to excavation. There's places you're going to get where you're in hard clay or rock or anything like that, and the utility is right there, and you're just like, well, let's just take the bucket and move all this top layer out of the way. Just like we talked about before, you don't know exactly how deep that utility is. So if it's underneath there, so say you're spotting a gas line, we'll pretend that yellow line right there is a gas line, and the comm line wires or the comm line paint has washed away. By the time you get there, you could pull up an entire fiber optic bundle, which I promise you is a bad time, very expensive to fix. So you don't want to do that. So never use mechanized equipment to dig directly over utilities or to break the soil loose to make it easier for hand digging. So this is a good way to give a visual indication of where you're going to be digging if you are going to use heavy equipment, right? So mark it off. We actually just talked about this out here today because we keep hitting walls. So give a visual indication of where the utility's at and then work on the other side of it, just like it has in the picture. That way you know once you've spotted it, right? So this is post spotting the utility, as you can see in the picture, that you're not anywhere near the utility. So beginning to excavate, always protect and respect the markings, right? Keep spoils away from locate marks or flags. That's really important because if you're digging a big pit or a trench or anything like that, and you're just working your way down, as you're bringing the spoil piles out, you could cover up your paint or your markings. And if that thing jogs left or to the right, now you've lost all your markings under dirt. Remember, it's just spray paint 9 times out of 10. So once you try to pull that dirt back off, you're probably going to pull those markings with it. So you're not going to know where you're at. You run the risk of hitting utility, which is not good. So do not dig or bore across marked facilities until they are properly marked. So what it's talking about there is like horizontal directional drilling or jack and bore drilling, things like that. You want to make sure that you properly expose that utility. And if you're going to bore across the utility, 9 times out of 10, you're going to leave that hole open while the bore head passes that utility. That way you can ensure that it didn't hit it, either above or below. And then once it's passed and then pulled back, then you can fill that hole back in. We did that a lot at the water treatment plant with the drilling operations out there running all that pipe. So do not dig within 12 of exposed facilities with power equipment. Keep the spade or shovel 12 inches away from the facility you're digging alongside. With their power equipment, will give you room for error in the event the facility doesn't run in a straight line. So if it's a 12-inch pipe, it's probably going to run in a straight line. If it's a smaller one, like a 2-inch commercial service gas main or something like that into a building, it might jog a little bit because it's just going to take the path of least resistance depending on how they put it in. So don't put yourself in that spot. Hit a couple gas lines over there at Camp Lejeune on CL17 with equipment. So, it's a really big deal if you hit a gas line or something like that. So try to stay away from those. So power lines and transmission towers. Power lines transmit electricity. I don't know if anybody was tracking, but that's what they do. So electrical current exposes workers to serious hazards. We talk about it all the time, especially when we have heavy equipment in the field. A lot on congested bases where we have to do excavations or working at heights. So most common hazard is electrocution. Most workers are unaware of potential electrical hazards. So that's our job to make sure they know all the hazards, how we can mitigate them, and keep them safe on the job site. So equipment, some activities may cause interference with power lines, right? Obviously. Overhead power lines, operation of a crane, forklift, and other construction equipment, changing streetlights, which we've got a lot of here in Altadena because all the stoplights burned down. And then tree trimming, also we have a lot of that here because I think they said we had 10,000 hazardous trees we're going to have to take down in Altadena alone. That doesn't include Palisades, which is the other fire location. So we've got a lot of equipment up in the air, moving around, so we've got to make sure we're looking out for the power lines. And especially if you're on those bases where they get in those warehouse roads and they just run the power lines right along the sides of the warehouses, you got to make sure you're watching out for those. If you're getting in lifts or on the roofs and stuff like that. So who's at risk? Almost everyone working near the power lines, right? You take a picture of that right there when unloading materials, watch out for overhead power lines. When I did the Typhoon Mawar response, their infrastructure is not great over there, so all the lines run and droop across roads, and we would snag lines with dump trucks that their beds weren't even raised. So, you got to make sure. Maui was the same thing. If we were doing the erosion control, we were dumping rocks on the properties, and we have the beds up, and they would literally just roll a foot forward and snag a comm line. So if you're going to be dumping around power lines, make sure you're using a spotter, right? That way he's watching the lines and he's keeping a good distance away from it. So again, common hazards, electrocution, injuries are typically fatal because electricity is bad. I don't mess with electricity at all. Electrical shock, fires, and falls as a result of contact with electricity because you're not going to hold on. Though fires may be caused after overhead power lines are hit, which causes fires, like we're on now. So common misconceptions: birds land on power lines, so they must be safe to touch. No, it's not just because they're birds. Main objective of electricity is to reach the ground using the most directed route. Birds do not get electrocuted when they land on wires because they do not represent a path to ground. So the power lines are safe for perching, but not when struck. So those birds are perfectly safe. If Kim was on this call, she'd be really happy about that. She's a bird person. So they're safe. You're not. Don't grab power lines. Power line, common misconceptions. Power lines are insulated, so they are safe to touch. No, they are not always insulated. Insulation deals with placing non-conductive material around the wire. Insulation is a material that offers high electric resistance, making it suitable for covering wires to prevent the possible future contact of adjacent conductors, resulting in a short circuit. So 9 times out of 10, if we go to a base and we see power lines, we're going to be working around them or anywhere. You should probably always ask to have the base come out, whoever, and blanket those lines. Like if you were any part of the Camp Lejeune project, you couldn't look anywhere without seeing blankets on power lines because we were working in warehouse rows and on roofs and trees and everything else. And we probably ran Eastern North Carolina out of blankets because they were everywhere, but it's the safe thing to do. Just because a wire is weather protected does not mean that it is insulated. Right? Weather protection prevents water and snow from reaching the wire and insulation if used. So don't ever assume anything. You know what they say about assuming. So hazard identification, conduct site investigations to identify existing conditions of voltage of the lines and equipment. That's pretty basic. We all know to do that. Presence of hazards, induced voltages, right? So if you have a high power line, your dangers are going to be different. Presence and condition of protective grounds and equipment grounding conductors. Locations of electrical circuits and equipment, and maximum switching transistor voltages. Right? It's all pretty basic. We should all know those things, but our subcontractors might not. So, which is why we're here, to keep them safe and notify them of all the hazards, help them mitigate them, and get them working on their path. So again, I put dump trucks in here a lot because it just happens a lot. Even on just the regular highways, you'll see a dump truck just hit an overpass with its bed being up. I don't know how you could possibly not know that the bed of a dump truck is up, especially if you're going 50 miles an hour. I've never driven a dump truck, but still. So make sure that the beds are down. You have spotters, because a dump truck rolling with its bed up will literally rip poles down and wires, and then you're in a much bigger mess than you need to be, because now you have hazards on the ground, in the truck, everywhere. So operation clearances for energized overhead lines. Probably not the first time anybody on this call has seen that, so I'm not going to read it. But just know for reference where it's at. It's also in the EM 385 many times. So injury prevention techniques: stay away from power lines while working. Maintain a safe distance, OSHA's 10-foot circle of safety rule. Increase safe distance near higher voltage power lines. Who does? Greg, what's your question? Greg, do you have a question?
Sorry about that. It's been a whole 3 hours and I forgot where the mic is. I was going back to that the dump truck with the raised bed. It should be maybe you already said this, but it should be a policy, guys, that he should not move out until his bed is all the way down.
Yeah, 1,000%.
If he's spreading material that's a little different, but still, if he can't spread material if there's a wire above him and keep his bed up, right? So it's always a good thing to do is make sure that, and the truck drivers don't want to do this, but they need to get in the practice of making sure it's down before they take off.
Yeah, so it's a good point.
Yep.
But on some of these debris missions like Maui and those places, you don't have a choice but to just get, it's a gray area. It has to be done. But you want to make sure if you're going to do anything like that, it's de-energized and you contacted the utility owner to make sure. It's a good point, Greg. Thank you.
Yeah, it has to be if he can't go down. I mean, there's certain exceptions, but for the most part, even if there's no wires around, I always make sure that no, you drive with it, put it down, then take off. Takes
Yeah.
like 10 seconds more. All right.
No, yeah, that's a great point. But again, truck drivers are. I hope there's no truck drivers on this call. They get difficult sometimes. So
And the other question I had is the guy that was digging the hole in the shorts. Was that a picture? You got that picture? Was that Mike LeBlanc?
that is actually that is.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
We're gonna use Jeff Bergeau for the next one. He's got some nice white legs.
And
But moving
nice
on.
try there, Greg Hayes. I feel like I'm being I'm calling that elder abuse because I'm going to be 60. So thanks for the elder abuse, Greg.
Oh, happy birthday!
Oh, not till May. But
Okay.
get me something. Remember, 60 is the big one. Sorry, Nick.
It is.
Hey, no worries. I'll probably be doing the training in May again, so we'll wish you a happy birthday then.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. So let's finish up with injury prevention techniques, right? So recognize high voltage power lines. If unknown, the appropriate agency should be contacted, right? Inform others about high voltage power lines. So it's real easy to look up utility companies, underground, above ground, right? We all got this fancy thing called Google. So, but it should be in your accident prevention plan or your site safety and health plan, what the utility companies are, and probably on your emergency contact list as well. It's a good practice. So use a spotter. Equipment operators have limited visibility. Get spotters help to stay clear of overhead power line. Spotters should only require spotting and not guiding, right? So they only need the one job. Guiders may be at risk of electrical shock, especially when using a tagline. I saw this firsthand on Camp Lejeune with another company where they were swinging a precast part of a parking garage and contacted the power line right there and shut off power to, I'd say 90% of New River Air Station. And the arc flash was so big, it was probably 3 blocks wide that you could have seen it. So it was, and the guys that were using the taglines were pretty scared because it was close. Not us, but we literally watched it happen as it happened. So it does happen out there. So contact with electricity. So if a coworker makes contact with a power line, stay away. Protect yourself. You could be shocked too if you touch someone who is in contact with electricity. So, back in the day when I was doing a different job, we had hooks, non-conductive hooks that if somebody gets, electrocuted or anything, you can snatch them with that hook because if they are getting electrocuted, they're going to just keep holding on to what they're holding on to because their muscles are all going to spasm. It would be cool if you could just run up and Spartan kick them off of it, but don't advise it. So try to break the contact with the electricity through the appropriate switches and things like that. Don't go over and grab them because you'll get shocked as well. So linemen, very susceptible to that on the left. That's pretty sad, but that does happen a lot. So any questions besides Greg, and now we know Mike's birthday? No? I'll take silence as consent.
Hey, I got a question for you.
Sure.
We have a pre-excavation checklist that we utilize, correct?
Are you asking me or telling me? The answer is yes.
Well, I just didn't know if we were still using it.
Yeah, it's in the SOPs, underground utilities.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Thanks for your question.
Hey, I got another one.
Okay, buddy, what is it?
So a lot of these procedures that Nick's been talking about, they all should be in the AHA for these different activities, right? So we can't forget to make sure they're in the AHA too,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
or
And
a
if there's any,
JSA if you guys are using a JSA.
yeah, JHA, JSA,
Yeah,
IWP. What was it? What was it in Canada, Greg? IWP.
I don't know. I've slept since then. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't want to remember.
IWC.
That's what it is. IWC, right? So I
That's right.
forgot. I forgot from when I was in Canada too. So. But yep, make sure they're in there. And then if anything changes, just remember all those documents are live and